Hi. As we're wrapping up the term, we're starting to think about the long-term view, both the long-term for your work in social justice and the long-term for a social perspective on where we want society to go. So starting first with you and your work, one of the things I really want to point out is that you have had very specialized training that most people don't get. So we kind of need you on the team. Not a lot of people devote 100 hours to social justice learning. And so the fact that you have this amazing skill set and this set of knowledge means that we could really use you on the team because there's not very many of us that are trained. One of the things I really want to help you work on is how to develop stamina for lifetime work and recognizing that work can be really heartbreaking. Social change goes really, really slowly and you will lose over and over again. And how to get up the 20th time after 19 defeats. Recognizing that it's really hard to keep going when the days are hard. One of the things is to know that this is the pattern, is recognizing that social change will break your heart, that this is not surprising, that we are trying to change the status quo, and that there's a lot of power fighting to keep things the way they are. So bracing and recognizing that this will happen over and over again can help you develop the patience to keep going with the work when it's really hard. Another thing is to recognize that this is very slow to happen, and we are used to thinking about short-term responses and saying like, well, I went to the march and nothing happened, so why would I keep going to marches if nothing happens? And understanding that social change comes from a lot of things all at once is when we have a set of people creating a movement. That's when we start to see things happen. It won't be one action that does it. It'll be a whole joint accumulation of things. In thinking about a historical perspective, sometimes it helps me get a better sense of what I'm looking at. So just thinking about the right to vote for white women in the United States, just that one thing, took at least 80 years of dedicated work. So between the 1840s and 1920s, there were a lot of women pushing really hard to make sure that women could have the access to the vote. And even within that, there were a lot of problems, a lot of racism happened. So in the end, the right to vote was only secured for white women. But one of the things I really want to emphasize is this 80 years thing, is we hear about this stuff in the history books, and mostly what we hear is, oh, and women got the vote, without recognizing that there were hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people working really hard on this for decades and decades, and they weren't seeing the fruit of their labor. So somebody may have worked this for 30 years, and then pass the torch on to somebody who worked it for another 30 years, and then pass the torch on to somebody who worked it for another 20 years. So how those folks stayed focused and kept working without feeling defeated and giving up hope is something that I really want us to think through, is recognizing that you won't necessarily see the outcome of what you're doing. And as I look back, I'm really grateful to the grandmothers and how they helped make sure that I could live in a world where I can vote. And I now take that for granted. And that was a relatively simple change, right? It was pretty much just adding a few little words, and women too. They didn't have to restructure any political parties. They didn't have to create new polling stations. They didn't have to rewrite the entire electoral process. They just needed to add, and women too. So a relatively small change was really, really hard to come to. Now, when we're thinking about much bigger changes and changing structures, we got to brace and get ready and say, this is not going to be fast. But I really want to make sure I leave something much better for my grandchildren. Thinking about some of the risks that could keep you from being able to continue in social justice work, I want to give you some of the tricks that I use. Recognizing first that one of the bigger risks that we have is losing you to burnout. So we got to make sure that you know that burnout is a likely thing to happen and how to brace for it and how to get ready and how to get out of it when it comes. The other thing is there's a high risk of feeling like you're not good enough. So perfectionism can be a really big obstacle in keeping you from doing the work. So let me start with perfectionism first. We have this notion that to be racist or to be sexist is to be immoral and to be a bad person, right? This is the good-bad binary we started out with at the beginning of the term. And that if anybody commits one of these mistakes, that they are a bad person, instead of recognizing it as a mistake from somebody who's learning. And since somebody is learning, we want them to be really focused on learning from their mistakes. So a good learning skill would be recognizing, oh, I made a mistake. Let me see what went wrong. and how can I fix it for next time? That would be how we would learn well. However, we get really stuck in the shame spiral of saying, I am a horrible, horrible person. I am a shameful, horrible, unethical human being. And then we don't want to hear the feedback. We don't want to learn from the mistakes. We just kind of want to hide them and get away from them as fast as possible. And this happens a lot with social justice work. We want to get ready to think of a mistake as a learning opportunity. And I know it really sounds cheesy, but there's an analogy that I like, right, which is the spinach in the teeth analogy. When somebody lets you know that you've got spinach in your teeth, it can be really embarrassing, but you want to get ready and brace and say, oh my God, okay, thank you for letting me know. Now I can get to that. Otherwise, you're walking around with spinach showing in your teeth. When somebody lets you know that you've made a social justice mistake, it can be really embarrassing and really overwhelming. But what we need is for you to pick up fast and be able to go, okay, let me learn from this. Let me fix it as fast as I can and keep going. So beware of those perfectionism traps. Those are likely to get you burnt out fast. And when it comes to burnout, a really good thing is to, first of all, know that it exists and recognize the pattern and how it shows up for you. It may be that for you, it's really based on irritability. It could be that you're just sad all the time, or it could be that you just don't want to hear about it anymore. And knowing those symptoms and how they show up for you can help you identify it faster and say, oh, I'm in burnout right now. Having a pre-planned, pre-thought plan of action would be a really good thing, and say, okay, I know that when I'm in burnout, what really works for me is to make sure that I can hang out with my friends, get some sunshine and exercise, go to my favorite movie. Whatever it is, knowing what works for you will get you out of that cycle much faster. I use a trick that works well for me, is recognizing that since we will lose and lose and lose many times in a row when it comes to social justice work, I keep a very tight hold of things that go well. So I keep a list that I call my hope bucket list, where I write down the things that have gone really well. Whenever we have a victory, I write it down and I celebrate it really, really big, because I know that they're few and far between. And when things are feeling like there's absolutely no hope and nothing can change, I can go back to my list and say, no, we have won. We do win. We win all the time. It's just really, really slow. So that is one of my favorite tricks on the very, very hardest days. And the hard days really do come. And when they do, I pull out my list and read, and it helps me feel a little bit better. I also try to make sure to stay away from situations that really suck out my hope. I kind of think of hope as a very fragile, limited resource. And when people really pull on it, it can get really draining. So if I know that there's a set of events or experiences that are really draining for me, I'll avoid them and say, I won't be having that Facebook fight, or I won't be going to that particular training with that particular trainer because I know it's going to make me feel really crappy at the end. So I'm going to hold on to the very little hope I have, and I'm not going to hang out that much with the folks who are stuck in cynicism and pain. I will work with them, but I'll make sure to protect the little hope I have, because it's a really fragile resource, and it's my most important tool as a social justice activist.